Hi, everyone. I want to thank Carma, but where are you in the back, for inviting us. It's an honor to be here. I'm a 72-year-old formerly incarcerated Jewish lesbian and the child of two survivors of the Holocaust. And those intersections impacted me while I was incarcerated in two different federal prisons and in solitary confinement. In 2009 and 10, prior to my going to prison for the first time, I was living with my mother, who could barely walk or hear or see, but she insisted on traveling 5 hours to my sentencing to speak to the judge. She said to him, and I'm going to read her exact words, "Your Honor, I am a Holocaust survivor. I have suffered enough for a lifetime. My daughter, she's a fantastic daughter. She's been doing everything for me. She feeds me, she shops, and without her, I cannot exist, not even for a day. I will die without her." To which the judge said, "Too bad, she's going to prison." Now, there was no reason for me not to have a home confinement, and I will tell you that the day after I left was the day my mother's life really headed downhill because we were very close. I was packing away. You unpack to go to prison. You put away everything. You take off your jewelry. And as I was unpacking and making notes for the person who was going to take care of my mother, she walked in. She was about smaller than I am, and she looked very serious, and she said, "I need to speak to you." Now, I stood up, and she said, "Prison is going to be harder for you than concentration camp was for me." And I looked at her and I said, "Are you crazy, Mom? You went to Auschwitz. I mean, how can you compare the two?" And she said, "I was 12 years old. You are 60. And later, when I was in solitary confinement, her words would come back to me. She said, "I was a child. I didn't know what was going on. You've had a lifetime of experiences, and you're going to remember every single one of them." And she was right. When the moment that you walk into prison, you know you have left the free world. An officer took me into a cold and dingy room and ordered me to strip and ordered me to pee in front of her, then asked me to lift my breasts so she could check for paraphernalia underneath, and then asked me to bend over and cough so she could check my anus and vagina for any paraphernalia or contraband. And at that moment, and it's not just what I'm saying here today, at that moment for everybody who's ever walked into a prison on day one, it is the most humiliating experience of your life. And in that 10 seconds that you're bent over with a stranger looking at you, you want to scream, you want to cry, you want to get out of there, and you also understand that you can't do any of that, and that you must remain stone-faced and stick all of your emotions and put them in a place you never knew you had. You had to find those coping skills in those 10 seconds, or you were not going to make it in prison. So I'm assigned to a first unit, which is a unit for people who are newbies. All of you have seen Shawshank Redemption. You see people walking off the bus. Newbies are very identifiable. And the veterans would walk over to me and say, "It's really, really important that you stay under, if you want to do easy time, that you stay under the radar. The warden shouldn't know your name, the officers shouldn't know your name." And of course, I was a baby of the women's, the gay rights, and civil rights movements. I was an old, experienced activist, and I could not check my activism at the door. And I will say it took less than an hour and a half for the warden and all the officers and everybody to know my name. And this is how it happened. You're allowed to bring in 25 pictures. So I'll set that aside for a second. First person walked over to me, "Are you married? Do you have a kid?" "No, I'm not married. I don't have a kid." Second person, "Are you married? Do you have a kid?" "No, I'm not married. I don't have a kid." And I entered prison at age 60. So after about the fourth person, I said, "Now this is ridiculous. I came out to my mother 40 years ago. I'm not going back in the closet," although I didn't think that through. And when I did come out to my mother, who was extremely progressive. I mean, extremely. She said to me, if Hitler didn't kill me, you will, which I thought was the funniest thing I had heard. And I had to hold my hand, you know, not to embarrass her. But anyway, next person that walked over to me, I said, no, I'm not married, I don't have a kid, and I'm a lesbian, which turned out to be a very dangerous thing that I did. So this young woman said, can I see your pictures? And I had brought in 25 pictures of my dog, Allie. So this woman screamed, this white old lesbian has 25 pictures of her dog. That was it. Inmate.com took over, 1,300 women across the entire compound. Within an hour, there's a lesbian who has 25 pictures of her dog. Now that might sound funny, but it ended up being very dangerous. I was punished the entire time I was in prison for having had the nerve to announce the fact that I was a lesbian. So I was I was moved immediately out of this, what they consider cozy unit, and there's no such thing as a cozy unit, to a very noisy unit, and I was put in a place called the bus stop. So for you to imagine this, everybody from in front of me is in a sleeping, everybody behind me is sleeping, and at 11 is where they sleep, and at 11 o'clock, when the lights go off, it's really pitch black behind me. Pass me my water. In front of me is the ice machine. They put 10, I'm sorry, I left out the punchline. They put 10 double bunk beds, and they called it the bus stop, and it's for people they wanted to punish. So I was in one of those beds. The fluorescent lights were kept on, and it's a low ceiling, so we were 3 feet away from the top of the bed, maybe 5, from the ceiling that was on all night. In front of us was an ice machine. To either side was the bathrooms, which 120 women were flushing toilets or taking showers all night. So the bus stop was a punishment because they wanted to put you in a position where you could not sleep, and I did not sleep. I did not sleep the entire time I was in prison. Excuse me. You have to work while you're in prison. And most of the women over 60 were given jobs where they could mop a floor for a few minutes and then sit down and read a book. They put me, this is West Virginia, and they put me in 90 to 100 degree heat. They gave me a broom, and they asked me to sweep rocks off the street. It's very hard to sweep a rock off the street. And as I was doing it during my first day, and there's heart disease on both sides of my family, so putting me in 90 to 100 degree weather to sweep a rock is just asking for me to, have a heart attack. But as I started sweeping the first day, I remembered a story my mother told me, which was in 1939 when the Nazis came in to Lodge, which is where she was born. They took all the religious leaders in the business, all the men, for 3 weeks. And they left the women and children home, and they took them to a place where they beat them mercilessly. So the last time my mother saw her father, he had jet black hair, he stood tall, and when they brought the trucks back in and she looked at her father, she got scared. He was completely gray and hunched over. And to humiliate them, they brought the wives and the children down, and they asked them, the men, to sweep the streets in front of the wives and children. And as I started to sweep the streets, I felt my grandfather, who I had never met, sweeping alongside me. And I felt that every day. In both prisons and in all prisons, there's no medical care. If you have a serious condition and you need an MRI or a scan, you're not going anywhere. You break your foot, it's broken, and you walk on it. If, God forbid, you get cancer, it's a death sentence. We had one physician's assistant who saw all 1,300 women, and whether they came in with a headache or a broken foot or cancer or a cyst, he said the same thing to each woman. Walk on the track, drink water, you're fat. That's the problem. So a woman named Miriam Hernandez came in. She looked to everybody like she was on the verge of death. And he gave her the fat speech. 2 weeks later, she died when her gallbladder burst. And I went crazy. Now, I was already posting on a website, but posting individual case stories, which the prison didn't mind. But this time, I wrote an article about the lack of medical care in prison. I didn't name the officer. I just said a simple blood test would have shown the officer that her gallbladder needed to be taken out, and she would be alive today. Similarly, if God forbid anything happens to your eyesight in prison, or you see, one woman saw a black line, your eyes and your ears, if you don't deal with them within an hour of a problem, you lose your hearing and you lose your sight. So another woman lost her sight so quickly, it was frightening. And in my article, I went over all these issues that we face in prison. And instead of snail mailing it, which is a bit safer, I emailed it because I was so angry. And I only had a month left in prison, and I didn't care. An hour after it was posted, I was arrested, I was shackled, I was taken to solitary and told that they could keep me there for as long as they liked. And believe me, they could have kept me there for a couple of years. They didn't. I was there for 7 weeks, and it permanently altered my physical, my mental, and emotional health. Every day. I can walk on an escalator and have a panic attack. I don't know when it's going to come, but it all comes from feeling caged. And even getting on the plane, we had forgotten to get me seats, and they put me in a middle seat, and I walked over to the people. I said, I can't do it. I'm severely claustrophobic. And this woman must have looked at my face, and she found me a seat that was either window or aisle. But it's still, I was released from prison in 2014. This is still impacting me every day, all day. So you can imagine what it does to other people. So I want to explain a little bit about solitary in a different way, but I'll start by saying solitary is a prison within a prison run by a handful of people who are answerable to no one, period. And for you to understand, and the primary reason that there were 60 women, they call it different things in different places, the shoe, solitary, the box. There were 60 women because I was in a prison where the male officers were openly asking women for sex. Now, 70% of the women I was incarcerated with were mothers. So an officer would be standing right next to me and say to this woman, do you want to see your kids this weekend? And she would say yes, looking at him like, of course. And he'd say then, excuse me, but he'd say then I want a blowjob. And you had to do it. If you didn't do it, you went to solitary. And if he was nervous that you were going to report him, he would send you from my second prison where I was in Florida to California, in which case you would never see your kids more than once a year, if that, because everybody is poor. So you were in a position, these officers were having sex with 4 to 6 women openly, and it's still going on. So the shoe, or the solitary, was filled with women who, for the purposes of retaliation, not because they were a national security nurse, not because they stabbed someone. Women don't fight. They want to see their kids, so I tried, as an activist, to get everybody to start putting in complaints, legitimate complaints. Nobody would do it. Nobody wanted to risk losing visitation. And because of that, the officers could do what they did. Now, you go in, you're strip searched again. You're given very few clothes, a t-shirt and a jumpsuit, and they keep the temperature so low that you're freezing. And if you ask for a blanket, they just laugh at you and say no. Now, for you to understand the gravity, I want you to imagine, and not a college dorm, but your own bathroom in your own home. And I want you have a toilet, and where your tub is You have a metal bed, and you have three choices. You can sit on the toilet, you can lie on your metal bed and get crippled, or you can stand. No books, at least in this situation. No books, no phone, no laptop, no crochet, no Sudoku, no crossword puzzles, no nothing. How many of you in this room could sit in your own bathroom for 24 hours? Anybody? Try to imagine a year in your bathroom, because that's you're locked to that one room, and that is all you have. So even if you didn't walk into prison with a mental health problem, you walked out of prison with a severe mental health problem, which stays with you most of your life. But I do want to just add something. It's the moment you're arrested that your life changes. It's not your incarceration. It's the moment you're arrested that people stop talking to you, that family stops talking to you, that your network disappears. I waited 12 years to get to trial. By the time I went to trial, there was nobody around except my parents. People leave you because the arrest is a conviction, and people look at you differently. They say, you must have done something to warrant it, which is the most false statement I can ever imagine. Now, I suffered from high blood pressure, and I begged for 2 weeks to have my blood pressure taken. And finally they came. It was 200 over 100. And I looked at him. I said, is it time for an EKG? I mean, I do have heart disease. And he laughed and said, if you die, we get $75,000 in insurance. They give you one roll of toilet paper, and then when you run out of it and you ask for a second, the guard looked at me and said, wipe yourself. And at that moment, just like the strip search moment, you think for a second and say, I'm not going to give this motherfucker a chance to see any upsetness in my face no matter what. Because you have to stay steely-like. And you do, in order to survive. And he didn't give me toilet paper for 3 days, because that's how it is in prison. Now, if you put 100 people who've been formerly incarcerated in a room, there's a lot of things they have in common. For example, when I was in and I'll get back to that, when I was in solitary, there were 60 women screaming, and excuse me for using words, but get me the fuck out of here. Now, they were not saying it together. They were saying it 24 hours a day, all the time, and to this day, I can't handle or be in a room with noise. And if that's one of I need quiet. And that's one of the things I find in common with other people who are formerly incarcerated. Many women tried to commit suicide and were successful. I didn't try to commit suicide, but I looked up to God and I said, I've had a great life, and it would be really okay if I didn't wake up tomorrow. And I meant that. I was basically saying, I can't take my own life, but please take it, because this is just too hard. Now, I was released about a week after being in solitary. You know, you're given a Greyhound ticket and $30, sometimes you get $100, and you're sent home. And I'm here to tell you that going home was worse than prison. I'm one of 700,000 people that get released every year. I was homeless and penniless for 16 months. And that was an experience that I never expected to have in my life. I went to nonprofits that served formerly incarcerated people, and they would give you a meal, they would give you a Metro card, they'd give you 2 weeks of employment training, they'd give you even 3 ridiculous jobs to go see. They sent me to carry 100-pound bags of potatoes for a food service company. I looked at him like, I'm 64, I'm disabled from my back. Is this really the job you think I should do? So what I will say is that there have been reentry services for 30 years that have received hundreds of millions of dollars in every city across the country. And despite the fact that hundreds of millions and probably billions of dollars have gone into reentry. We've not reduced recidivism. We have no long-term employment. We have no long-term housing. And basically, we have what they say in prison. Prison's not broken. It's working exactly as it's supposed to. And I will tell you, reentry is not broken. It's working exactly the way they want it to. They want us to re-incarcerate. They want us, it is a jobs program for people who haven't been formally incarcerated, and they do not want to give it up, except there are people like us in this room that are saying, the hell with what you are doing, we're going to do it differently. Now, I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen for 20 years in the women's movement, and she said, where have you been? And I said, in prison. She said, where are you living? I said, nowhere. And she said, you won't stabilize, and I want you to start witness to mass incarceration. She was a great human being who unfortunately passed away last year. So she found me in a tiny studio apartment, and I said, I can't take this because my whole Social Security, which is the only money I had, will go to pay rent, and then I won't be able to eat. She said, don't worry, I'll find you a job. I said, Irv, you won't be able to find me a job. I'm 65 and a convicted felon. Anyway, about a week later, she came back and she said, I went through my Rolodex, and you're right, I can't get you a job. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give you $1,000 a month. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough to pay your bills, so you could start witness. And by doing that, she basically saved my life, because I was, after 16 months, I just didn't care if I was still alive. And I am not a suicidal person. And I'm not a depressed person. I am a, optimist. But one person saved my life with for me, was a lot of money. And it bought me a year. But the most important thing is, she said, you won't stabilize until you have housing. And the truth is, when I walked into this little apartment and I turned the key and it was mine, it was the first time in decades I felt safe and I felt free. So I formed Witness to place the voices of people of color, indigenous people, LGBTQIA2S people at the front of the movement to end mass incarceration and to create initiatives that were transformational instead of what we are dealing with. I'm glad I got the meal. I'm glad I got the Metro card, but those transactions and that way of doing business transactionally, coupled together, cannot rebuild a life. So Witness is, because we're committed to transformational change, our initiatives and projects are designed this way. We have 5 initiatives. Reentry is our main initiative, but reentry starts while people are in prison. Our first program, which is for newly released people, is an 18-month model that basically says, and we don't have it perfected. It takes a lot to make this work. 6 months before people leave, we want to pen pal with them. We want to know when they're coming out. We ideally want to meet them day one, take them out for their first meal, and give them, you see the suitcases over there? We give suitcases that have computers, phones, gift cards for food, transportation, clothing, and toiletry. You need stuff when you come out. Most importantly, I came out alone and landed in Port Authority and found myself crying. And that experience informed me to say, we're not letting people come home alone. And we'll give them a few people in the community to call. So after we meet with them, ideally, they have access to us for as long as they want. Most of them don't want to have access. Most of them go their own way, but they know we're there for them. Our second initiative is what I think are most important, which is the economic development of formerly incarcerated people. We have the highest level of unemployment at 27%, with black women at 43%, and that's prior to COVID. We have barriers towards getting a job, and even when you get a job, when they find out you're a convicted felon, you can lose that job. Our best way to manage is by starting our own services and businesses. And we are totally building a reentry program that wraps our arms around the person from the time they leave to making sure that they have an economic, that make sure that they can start their businesses, sustain the businesses, and build the first generational wealth that they can. So how we did this was 5 phases. 1, I realized there's no listing of formerly incarcerated businesses and services anywhere in the United States. So in 2019, we built one. We have a platform that currently has 1,300 names on it from across the country, and people use it. 2, that we built a platform, we populated the platform, we created a social media profile. I interview people for before, during, and after prison, a 2-hour interview, and we have a digital library which has 50 interviews and 200 hours of video. And we use this to push social media and to push out what we're doing. We create outdoor and indoor events called Suitcase Sunday for 2 reasons: to give people a chance to sell their goods and services, but to also put us in proximity with the public so they understand we are not as dangerous as law enforcement would like you to believe we are. And our new pilot project, which is starting in a month, is we are taking our own formerly incarcerated businesses, a tailor, and we're having him, the pilot is to have him train 20 people who know how to sew and want to become tailors to be tailors. It's the cheapest and most direct route to giving someone the ability to earn an income. Because after 2 months with our tailor, they will be able to either open a small business to start, work with him, or we'll place them somewhere. And we'd like to build this into a 5-day-a-week program so that we take formerly incarcerated people who are already in business successfully, and they bring other people along with them because we trust each other. And hang on, I just have one more thing, and then I'll hand it over to Tasha. We are building an e-commerce storytelling marketplace. Think of Etsy or Amazon, but we're doing it with, you're going to see a picture, a page about the person, about their life, about their incarceration, and their products underneath. I want to drive traffic to one place because I do believe that if we can economically survive, then we can have housing, and then we could be food secure. And finally, as part of our reentry package, it's civic engagement. We can't just stop at helping people when they come out, helping people to stabilize. We have to get them to be stakeholders in their communities. This is a population who doesn't want to vote. 1 in every 4 are registered to vote. There's 80 million people who've been convicted of a crime. We are a potential economic and civic force, but we're not there. We can be. We have to train people on what it is they need to, they have to know that carceral positions are elected positions, judges, prosecutors. They have to understand ballot initiatives may be in our favor to restore our rights. They have to get engaged.